Evening. Good evening. My name is Don Ficken. I'm with the Library Telescope Task Force, and I'm glad to have you once again as part of our series, our Library Telescope program series. Actually, this is our 42nd video. Tonight's program will be about the common maintenance issues that we have with the Library Telescope. And my cohort, Tom Lynch, is usually joining me, but he's actually on a trip today, so I'm by myself. But anyway, I think we have a good program for you tonight. I'm with the St. Louis Astronomical Society. And let me just go a little bit through what the Library Telescope program is if you're not familiar with it. First off, it was formed in 2008, and it is a program that's pretty simple. You put a telescope or even binoculars into your library, and you check it out like a book. What a great idea. There's over 1,000 locations. We have something like 7 countries now involved. Pretty much every state in the USA has one, and most every province in Canada, and then we have several, as I mentioned before, in Europe. Our program is really supported by a series of volunteers. We're all volunteers, and our goal is very simple: to grow the program and share best practices. We have a really active Facebook page. Our Tom Lynch, who's not here tonight, has done a great job of growing that. We have nearly 7,000 followers. There's really regular active postings about all kinds of stuff around astronomy and other cool stuff. We also have a very robust website that has a world map. We have, if you go, for example, into the US, if you happen to be from the United States, you could go to a state and click on that state and then drill down, and we could find out if there's any, known libraries that we know about, at least, that have that program in the library. And we also have a lot of resources. There are certain modifications that we'll talk about a little bit tonight that we make to the Library Telescope to make it what I call more patron friendly, and to make it actually last a little bit longer, because these telescopes are used quite a bit, a little bit more than a normal consumer telescope. And so we have a lot of really great resources there. One of the things that we have on our website is a really cool map. Obviously, if you get down to out with the stars at night, you want to know where things are. And a planisphere, or sometimes called a sky map, can help you find your way. And one of our members is with the Astronomical League, John Goss, and he prepares monthly sky charts for us. You can find those right on the front page of our website. We have Spanish and English versions of many of the sky charts, and usually a few cool events. So this one you're seeing right here is for the month of July, and I've got actually to get August out there pretty shortly, so that'll be coming up soon. So these are great resources. They're not overcomplicated, which is really nice, because particularly if you're in the urban area, you only have so much time to really, only so many stars to be able to see. And so this gives you some of the big stuff that you can actually see, which I think is really very cool. So we've been doing these programs for quite a while. If you go to our website, on the homepage of our website, you'll see the programs listed back for several years. Last month, actually for the last couple of months, we've been doing a series called the Top 10 Questions type of thing. In May, it was about the top 10 questions that librarians typically ask us about the Library Telescope program, like how do I get started? How does it really work? Last month, we did a program on top 10 questions asked by astronomers. In other words, astronomy clubs. They need to help the library get going. What's their obligation? Tonight, we'll be focusing on the common maintenance issues. In other words, I've been doing this for about 10 years in our Metro St. Louis area, and we've learned a lot of lessons. And then in August, we're going to switch it up a little bit. We have a really cool program about International Observe the Moon Night, which actually is in September. So we're giving it to you just a little bit early so you can get ready for that. And we'll have a lunar scientist that'll be helping us kind of explain what that program's all about and how you can get involved, whether you're a library or just a person. I will be taking some questions at the end. We're on Facebook, and we also have a local Zoom audience here. So if there's questions that you have, if you're on Facebook, just put those in the comments area. And if you're on Zoom, we'll put those in the chat area, and I'll try to pick those up at the end. So I'm going to stop share. I'm going to go back to my regular point. And I see Mr. Sweeney here. Good evening. One of our task force members. All right, so let me see. We got one person wanting to come in here. Let me let them in real quickly. All right, we got a number of tonight that are actually at a conference, so they're not, our normal group is not here. So let me just start with a little background. I'm obviously in the St. Louis, as I mentioned before. The program actually was founded out of New Hampshire. It's a really great program. So we've got a lot of experience. We get together once a month, a lot of us, and we talk about things. But I'm going to bring tonight a little bit of my experience because I've been doing this. We have about 200 telescopes in the St. Louis area. The concept to start with, just to explain, is that if you were to buy a telescope from, in the case of Ryan or Zummel, whatever else, this is what's been historically done. You could put it out there like that, but what happens is that there's the lenses that come out and you put back in. There's red dots that you can leave on and leave them on too long to run the batteries out. You can lose things basically. So what we do in our library telescope task force is we make changes to that telescope so that it looks a little bit more like what's on the right-hand side there. We put ropes on the lens covers. We put uh, an extra battery pack. The little finder that helps you find the stars and line up your telescope has a pretty small battery that doesn't last very long. And so we actually put a battery pack on the side so that if you happen to leave it on as a patron, it'll actually go probably a couple of weeks on really a faint signal, if you will, to be able to not run out real quickly. And there's maps. There's really cool things like Audubon guides of constellations and little red headlamps and things like that that we put in there. So it's kind of a bundled kit. Part of that is just functionality. In other words, to make it easier to use it so they don't have to learn which IPs to put in kind of thing. But part of it's also to make it last longer so that it doesn't break as quickly. It's not unusual for a telescope in a very popular program. Let's say that you have a library that checks things out 1 to 2 weeks and it's checked out really pretty regularly. It could be checked out 30 times a year. And so it's getting, and every one of those checkouts is probably like it's a brand new telescope. So they'll be using it pretty heavily for that period of time. So they get a lot more use than you would expect just a normal consumer telescope to actually get. All right, so I'm going to put a couple prefaces up here to start with. This is based on my experience in St. Louis. This is very common, some of the stuff that I'll be talking about throughout the country. They could do it a little bit differently. The way that they put together the telescope might be a little different. We launched our program in 2014, and we're well over 200 telescopes. We've got, I think, well over 40 library systems, 80 locations, everything from small to big libraries. Metro St. Louis area is quite large, as you can imagine, as far as the area goes. And so we have a lot of experience in all kinds of situations, even some pretty suburban areas. Sometimes it's one telescope, it's one library that doesn't have hardly a conference room. That's how small it is. Our models that we use for our St. Louis program has been pretty much the Orion Star Blast. And of course, if those of you that have been around a while know that the Star Blast changed its makeup a few months of last year, rather. They kind of redesigned it. So there's like a pre-2023 version, then a 2023 version. They look very similar, but the way they actually are put together is slightly different. And then there's a thing called the Zummel Z14, which is another, it looks like the Orion Star Blast if you look at the details, but it's black instead of teal, and it's a little bit shorter base, but they basically are very similar in terms of just the way they operate and the way that we actually make most of the modifications. To explain what we did in St. Louis, when we rolled out the program, we followed the New Hampshire program recommendations to the letter. I would say for the first 5 years, we rolled out well over 100 telescopes, sometimes 50 at a time, and we followed them to the script, period. So look, we don't have enough experience to know if they're right or wrong, but if they've been doing it for a while, then we're just going to take that and go with it. What happened after the first 5 years is that as we started getting these telescopes out a lot, we started learning a little bit about what really is not working, what will work better. And so we started making our own changes based on experience. I should say, too, that we don't do this perfectly because we have a lot of libraries, but we do try to do a regular maintenance program. In other words, one particularly large library, we will bring like a series, maybe a third of the telescopes in, maybe twice a year. So every 3 years, we're open to completely maintain the telescopes. We'll run maintenance programs twice a year, trying to capture and keep those telescopes kind of tuned up, if you will. Even though they may be working, Maybe the optics are a little off, or there's something a little dirty. We want the best experience we can with the libraries themselves. So we've got, this is really, so what I'll talk about tonight is pretty much based on this foundation. Nothing complicated. There are lots of other versions of this out there. I would say most of them have followed the Orion Star Blast. Some have gotten bigger telescopes. Some have gotten different kinds of telescopes. And so there's no universal, you have to do it this way kind of approach. And so we just need to kind of make sure that everybody's kind of on board with that to start with. All right. So what are the common issues that I have? And I've not tried to compile this into a list like, we have this many of the red dot finder, this many of Zoom. This is just because it's evolving, quite frankly, as we continue to make changes and fix things and whatever else, we'll start fixing things. So to give you say a series of like 3 years, what we found with red dot finders wouldn't be really a good view of this, because as we make changes, it just gets better all the time. So we've had a lot of problems with red dot finders. And if you don't know what a red dot finder is, it's basically a thing on the telescope that you look through, and you're trying to find, you put a red dot, which is not a laser, a red dot on a star. And when you put that dot on a star, if you look in the eyepiece, if everything's correctly lined up, you should be able to see that same star. Let's say you put it on the moon, you should be able to look in the eyepiece and see the moon. The red dot finder is really a great idea. As a first-time patron, you're going to find out that it can be challenging, because there's a lot of things that can go wrong with that, especially when you're doing 30 checkouts a year. So anyway, we'll talk a little bit about that. The zoom lens has been a constant problem for us. Not the zoom lens itself, but the little rubber eye guard that goes on there, and just some other elements to it. The focuser's been the focuser's actually got a plastic tube in it, and it was breaking down constantly. So we figured out how to work on that. Sometimes we have a broken base. Sometimes we have a few lost items. So that would be the more common issues that we have. The more uncommon issues we have, we really haven't had, I don't think, any damaged mirrors at all. We've had telescopes that were out of collimation. And if you don't know what that is, it just simply means that the star is the telescope is focused so the stars are sharp as possible. In other words, it's just like tuning, something that you want, like a radio. If you want to get a really good signal, you want to be able to get it properly tuned. It could be a little out, so maybe something's a little fuzzier than it should be. But most of the time, the collimation and the telescopes that we're using are pretty good. We haven't had too many damages to the telescope tube or anything like that. I can't think of too many times. Sometimes there'll be a little dent in it, and we'll put a sticker on it. But for the most part, the foundation of the telescope, its mirror tube and its collimation, the kind of like the big stuff on that side is really fine. It's these other common issues. And let me kind of go what I'm talking about through some of these issues. Okay. So the probably the most common thing that we get with red dot finders is it's not aligned properly. And what I mean is somebody will bump that little red dot finder, and it was all tuned up, just kind of like a little gun sight. It was perfectly lined up for the red dot to be on the object that you want to look at in the eyepiece, and somebody bumped it, and it could be bumped really bad. Sometimes they really don't know how to align it as a patron. If you've never done that before, you don't know really what you're doing. And so that's a pretty common problem. And they also, you would be surprised how hard it is to see that little faint dot in there. When you turn this thing on, you just turn it off like a little radio dial. You turn it up, and there's a little faint dot in there. And if you're not lined up just properly behind the telescope, they can't see it. Now, the alignment portion, that we try to fix that through some basic training, through library programs where we show people how to line it up. Pretty straightforward. We do have instructions. The red dot is, quite frankly, is usually, if we'll sometimes get a sales call and they say we can't find the red dot. We'll say, well, try to go into a bathroom, turn off the light, and there it is. And so it's just really kind of difficult to see, but it is a continuing problem with us with the red dot finder whenever we have that, to make that actually work properly. The other problem that we have with the red dot finder is libraries, they get all trained, the staff's all great, they love the program, and pretty soon staff changes. They don't know anything about the batteries. The batteries are dead. They don't know how to change them. They don't know how to take the screw out. They don't know where the screwdriver is. We've had some issues with that. We also have had this problem right here, is that if you follow the instructions of the original New Hampshire, they're fine. Actually, they're good. But what happens is that the person who actually does the wiring, as we're showing right here, they may not do it properly. And pretty soon the wiring gets loose. and the red dot won't work, or it looks like the switch is bad, and pretty soon you get big problems. And so we actually moved from this little modification right there. You can see there's where the arrow is pointed to. The wires are going in there, which is kind of like where the battery was. We sort of made it to where the battery was hooked up this wire. That was the original New Hampshire design. We actually moved to where we moved the wiring directly into the object itself, into the red dot finder itself. So you're not going through the battery thing anymore. And that kind of worked on it at least for a while. That was one of our solutions. There's a lot of times that they simply are losing the battery case screw. I know that seems like a little bitty thing, but they're taping it on. They don't know where to find the screw. They can't find a screwdriver. So that's been some issues here. None of this is really critical, folks. I mean, the telescope's operating just fine whenever these things are not working. And surprisingly, there's been more than once that we've been called and the whole red dot finder is simply off the mount. In other words, it got loose somehow. And so if you can see the little hole to the right of that arrow, we started zip tying them on there, and that seemed like it worked a lot better. So it might get a little loose, but we're not going to lose it. And sometimes when it comes off, they put it on backwards, and then they can't really, there's no way they can find the red dot then. But what we've done in St. Louis, though, is actually gone to completely trying to eliminate the fact that you can't see the red dot, that the batteries are dead, that the battery pack's got bad wiring, and there's lots of screws, a lost screw on the battery case. What we do is we simply 3D print some type of finder. We've got one that looks like this, but there's other models. If you go to our library telescope.org page, go under the area where you're building telescopes and look for the hacks and fixes link, and it'll show you some of the 3D printed types of files that we have. That seems to solve it. It's really intuitive. If you think about, you're trying to point a telescope at something and you have two things to line up. It's like a gun sight, if you will. People kind of get that. They can't find the red dot, but they can find that. And it just makes sense to them. And we're not really trying to find the really, really hard things in the sky. So if you're looking at the moon or Saturn or Jupiter, this little simple system, whether it's what we have here, which is simply a little bit more complicated system of a 3D printed site. There's another one that's very simple. That's more like just a little saddle with two little holes. It's like a little gun sight. Either one of those work fine. And it seems like that gets the job done just fine for our library patrons. All right, the second issue that we have, you can see on the right-hand side, you got the eyepiece, and then there's a lens cover. That's the dust cover, if you will, that you put on the lens whenever you don't want it to get dirty. You're finished with it, you put the lens cover on, and that hopefully will keep the dirt off. What happens is that right before, you can see where I'm pointing there with this, there's a little rubber eye guard. And the idea that guard goes onto the lens, and as you put your face close to the lens, it kind of tells you that you're about the right distance. You know, you kind of touches your eyebrows, your face. It's called an eye guard. And it's fine if you own the telescope and you go out a couple times, but when you're doing this 30 times a year, what happens is that people lose these little rubber eye guards. They pull off pretty easily. And we have gone through bucketfuls of those things. And so what we've learned to do is simply put some electrical tape around the eye guard so that it's taped to the eyepiece. And by golly, that solved it. We haven't really lost hardly any anymore. So we keep freshening that tape every time we see a telescope. You know, no questions asked. We take the old tape off and put the new tape on, and by golly, it seems to work. The other thing we've had some issues with is the dust cover, the lens cover, if you will. It's pretty thin. And even though we have a rope on, I don't have a rope in this example, but there's a rope on it. What happens is that it gets cracked, and pretty soon it's split and it comes apart, and now there's no dust cover anymore. So we're just 3D printing those, and that seems like it fixes it. It really hasn't been an issue for the most part, except they do crack and are thin, and we're printing just a little bit thicker ones so they hold up a little bit better. So issue number 2 is the zoom lens. All right, so the focuser is an interesting. So this is obviously just the focus itself. It's coming off the telescope. I don't have the telescope here to kind of make it a little bit bigger here. But what I've circled is where the zoom lens goes into the little gadget there that has the little knobs. And what you do is you turn the knobs so that it pulls the lens in and out. It's kind of like focusing binoculars or something where you get a clear image. So we've had a lot of issues with that. And let me explain what I mean by that. into that little tube where this is where the eyepiece goes into this thing right here that you're looking at. It comes in two parts. There's the zoom lens, this little part on the left screws into the other part, and it goes into the focuser, and then all the lens, the entire zoom lens goes into there. So what's happened is that you can imagine that particularly an enthusiastic 8-year-old, they're really, really turning the zoom lens back and forth to get, some whatever else. And they start over time, they will work the left-hand thing to where it's loose from the right-hand thing. And no matter how tight we put it, or no matter how we try to secure it with glue or whatever else, they manage to work it loose eventually. And it comes apart, and pretty soon the zoom lens is falling out, and we get a library telescope, a library call to fix it. The other thing, which I'm pointing to with my little red arrow there, that shaft, which is the thing that the zoom lens goes into, and it's got little gears that you can move it in and out when you make your tuning, if you will. That shaft has got it's plastic, and what happens is that again you get an enthusiastic youngster, and they get to the end of they move it all the way out or all the way in, and they continue moving it to try to keep turning it. They won't stop, and they strip that little plastic thing out. So we've had a lot of problems with that, with things just falling out because the things are stripped. The zoom lens won't work anymore. And so the answer we've had here in St. Louis is very simple. We print a single unit, the two things together, as one unit. We put it in there, and it costs less than $1. And even though it's plastic, it'll get stripped out, but we put it in the telescope and we secure it, and we just change them every time we see the telescope. It almost costs nothing to do that. And we pretty much resolved the issue with the focuser tube. It just seems like it works now. It might get a little loose, and the other one you see above there only has 2 screws to tighten in the zoom lens. You can see the little screw here on the left-hand side right here. There's 2 of those, and this one's got 3, and we can tighten them down pretty good the way we've got it built. So that seems to solve the problem. So the focuser is issue number 3, and we've had a lot of issues with that, and we've tried a lot of different techniques, but simply making a single unit that you can replace pretty easily. We just almost like automatically switch it out every time we do maintenance, and it doesn't cost hardly anything. It seems like it's mostly solved our issues for us for that. All right, looks like I've gone from 3 to 5 there, but the next one is the broken base. We actually haven't had that much of this, but what I found more commonly is if you look down the very bottom right there, there's a little peg leg. I don't know what they do, but they're dropping that base. Maybe they're holding the whole thing with one hand. They drop it too hard, but those little peg legs are broken all the time. It seems like I just buy a box of them, and what I do is I just put another peg leg on there, maybe move it slightly, and I'll put it on there. On a few occasions, we've had a little bit more serious. You can see here, this is what, if you look at the top right there, this is actually the part of this part right here that I'm on. And what's happening is that guy right there is actually a little particle board. It's not very good. And if they land the telescope wrong, it'll break that. And so what we did is we simply worked with a little woodworking guild that they like to make things, a bunch of these with a template. And by golly, we suddenly have a pretty nice replacement for the base. So it's very straightforward. You have to paint it, but the holes all match up. We just move the hardware over, and it really is about the same weight, give or take some, but it's a lot stronger to really make it work. So that's the issue, next issue there. So next issue then is not really a big one, but we've had some issues where, well, every time we go in and we do maintenance, we say, okay, we got everything fixed. Now let's see if everything's there that we're expecting to have. So there's a little camera bag on the side. It's kind of like a little thing that a kid might have, except we staple it to the telescope, or rather zip tie to this telescope. And in that little camera bag, we'll have a headlamp, which you see up there, an Audubon guide to help the users, the patrons, figure out their way around, and then the user manual on the right-hand side. I just keep a box of these little red headlamps, because what happens is the librarians forget to check whenever they're turned in, and the patrons end up keeping. They like the little red lamps. This will have not only a white light but a red light, and so they end up liking these. And sometimes we'll get a swap where they like our red light, but they had a headlamp, and they'll give us the headlamp that has no red light. It only has a white light, and they'll keep the one with the red headlamp. They're not particularly expensive, and it's not a big issue here, but it's something we have to watch for. It's just a little bitty thing. The Ottoman guide, we pretty much keep that in there. They seem like they like that, and we almost never lose the user manual. That's not been really a big issue for us. So the common issues, once again, the red dot finder has been a problem for us from the beginning. There was zoom lens. Mostly it's about the rubber eye guard. Occasionally we have a few internal problems, but not too often. The focuser's been an issue just by the way it's built, and frankly, it's the frequency of use. In other words, it's being used 30 times probably a year. Sometimes we can have 200 people on a waiting list, and so they're using this telescope quite heavily. A broken base every so often, and lost items. We don't have too many problems with the mirrors. We don't have too many problems with the collimation of the telescope being out like a really long way. It sometimes can be. I mean, it's really dropped hard. And we don't have too many problems with what I call the tube itself being dented or damaged. It seems like it's fairly straightforward. So the wrap up here, and we'll see if we have any questions here. The wrap up is simply this, is that we've been in this program in the Metro St. Louis area for almost 10 years, and every telescope that we have has been repaired. We don't have a single telescope that we had to completely decommission because it was broken too bad. We sometimes will have to do a few things to make that work. Maybe get a wood base, build a wood base, or change. It makes maybe 3D some parts, but we were able to get them all working. We found that we've reduced the amount of maintenance issues by a couple things. First off, as we have rolled out our program, we've been modifying the bill of procedures. When we found out that we don't do a really good job of modifying the battery pack on the red dot finder so that it's wired well, we first started wiring it a lot better, but then we figured out a way to simply not even have one of those wired red dot finders anymore. We host regular maintenance programs. That's important because even though you may not know it as a patron, as a library that is not working, your patron may be having a very poor experience. So we want to be able to be on top of that. We want the library patrons to have a great experience. And so by doing regular maintenance, we do a pretty good job, I think, of keeping the telescopes operating and making sure that they actually have a good experience. We had a lot of problems trying to find replacement parts to begin with, but with the 3D printing technology now, we can replace it. We can print a replacement focuser tube. We've done replacement lens caps. We've done replacement several different things here. And so we have a lot of those posted on our library telescope page. You can also go to some of the printables and other places and find where somebody's created a replacement for the library telescope, finders, whatever else. And then by simply working with people like the Woodworkers Guild, who likes to make stuff that's wood anyway, they can help us replace big stuff. So for the most part, it's actually been where we're able to reduce the maintenance quite a bit, and the telescopes seem to be, I would say, doing pretty well. There are times when we'll get some very abused telescopes. Maybe it's something's disassembled completely. In other words, like there's a little secondary mirror is what they call it that's in the tube, and we've had that taken apart and in all the screws in the bag. But that's really, really rare. I mean, you'd be surprised how respectful that I think that people are of the telescopes that they have. And in fact, it's maybe sometimes almost the other way. They're almost afraid to check it out because it seems like it's expensive and they don't want to be liable for the parts. But for the most part, I've found patrons to be fairly respectful of that. So with that, I'm going to let's see if there's any questions out there. I'm going to stop share. Let's see here. All right, so we've got a few comments here. Well, we got a couple of things in the chat. Let's see if we've got any questions out. If you've got some questions at Facebook, by the way, if you're listening to us, just go ahead and post those out there. So what do we got here? All right. All right, so one of our members who's an experienced person says a three-tier approach is critical to the success of the programs. We need to modify the telescopes to minimize the parts, provide training to library staff and patrons, and make sure that we have good maintenance. And I agree with all those. I did not really touch a real lot on the fact that we have tried to train the library staff with the idea that if, set my thing here, if they are afraid of the telescope, in other words, if you walk up as a patron and you're afraid of the telescope, I'm sorry, as a patron, you walk up and there's a librarian that seems to be afraid of the telescope, if I can get my words in here, if they're seen to be afraid of the telescope, you're going to be not very comfortable checking out the telescope as a patron because you say, wow, if they're afraid of it, then I should be afraid of it. But if they've been trained, if they're comfortable with that, then they're going to be able to have a much better experience. So we try to train the library staff, but as you can expect, library staff, they're changing constantly. They got lots of issues on their plate right now. So sometimes it just doesn't work. So we try to do as best we can. And then are you using super glue or epoxy on any of the components of the telescope? And do you use hot glue? We have pretty much got away from super glue and epoxy. We do use hot glue whenever the ropes are tied to let's start over. There's a lens cap, a dust cap, if you will, on the lens of the zoom. We tie that to the telescope base. Whenever we tie that, I don't care how well you try to tie it, it seems like eventually it gets worked loose. So what we do is we put a little spot of hot glue right there. And the same with the dust cap, which is the main telescope tube. There's a cap that keeps the dust out of that. Again, whenever we get to a knot, we try to tie that try to make that extra tight with a little bit of hot glue. So those are things we do, but we have found over time, we used a lot of glue to begin with, and we found that over time it breaks down, and some of the eyepieces became a mess because we were trying to do some glue kinds of things, and for the most part, it just doesn't seem to hold up really well over time. And we have another question. Do you have any libraries that do light maintenance, such as lens cleaning or screw tightness? Yes, yeah. So we're actually piloting some ideas in the St. Louis area. So you can imagine we've got 200 telescopes plus. We have 4 astronomy clubs, but these libraries, these telescopes are checked out a lot, and they really don't want to take them out of circulation. So let's say that they have what they call a service call. Something's not working. If they get to us, we get to them usually pretty quickly. But it's still probably a couple days out at best, really, because by the time we get there, fix the thing, and they get it back in circulation, it's going to take a couple of days. So a lot of libraries, I've been training them to do what I call level 1 maintenance, meaning what they do is I'm going to teach you how to change the batteries, and I'm going to teach you how to do some real simple things like replace the lens cap on the zoom lens. I can give you some of those because I can 3D print those, and you can switch that pretty quickly, right? You don't need to wait for me to come to your library and then put those on there. And there's other examples like that I call, they're really simple things that anybody pretty much with a small screwdriver and whatever else can do. What we do is we move that up to different levels of difficulty. And, there's level 2 and 3, where maybe 3 means I have to actually do something with the mirror that's more serious, and that's going to take some skills. But they're moving along. A lot of them are learning to do that first level of maintenance. And because we can 3D print things now, we can sometimes just give them a handful of replacement parts and they can just take care of. Occasionally, for example, I have, if somebody loses one of those little screws on the little battery pack, I'll just mail them a screw and they'll get it in a couple of days. And they're able to just put the screw in there. They're able to fix it themselves. I don't need to make a sales call. Sometimes the drive can be quite a distance. If you can imagine, it could be half hour, 45 minutes to get to the place. So to the extent that they can take care of stuff on their own, that actually gets the telescope back in circulation pretty quick, which is really great. And then it says, how can you tell when the lens or a mirror should be clean? Well, that's always a tough one. My mother was a person who really was spotless house cleaner, almost to the point it was a fault, And if you were to look at one of our mirrors sometimes, it'll have a little dust on it or tiny spots of whatever else it is. My mother would have gone crazy with that, right? She would have said, we got to get something out and clean that stuff. And what we would say is that optically, it's not going to make much difference. And well, my mother would say, well, then clean it anyway. Well, here's the thing, is that the mirrors are silverized. In other words, the part that looks silver for your home, they're silverized behind the glass. In other words, you can clean your mirror just fine because it's just glass, but the silver is behind the actual glass itself. But in these telescopes, the silver is on the front. So every time you touch it, every time you rub it, and that goes true, by the way, of your binoculars, you don't want to mess with putting tissues and things like this, scratch, because it'll scratch the optics, if you will. You don't want to scratch that mirror. It only's got so many cleanings in it. So we are really reluctant to do that. We will do it, and we know how to do it, well. We use very gentle techniques with just the right kinds of ingredients and use things like our breath to blow things off to where we can get it properly. But we don't want the patrons just cleaning it, and we certainly don't want the librarians to do that unless they know what they're doing. And we haven't got anybody where we're comfortable with that yet. So basically, your lens has to be really bad for us to want to clean it. And sometimes we do need to clean it, but for the most part, I wouldn't get too messed up with the optics being out there. All right, so do we have any questions from any more on Facebook like that? I don't see any more right here. So any other questions from this group right here? So I would say the recap is a lot of libraries, I believe, are worried that this is going to be one of those things that's going to be really hard to keep up with. And I would say that 10 years ago, I would have said the same thing. But as I've learned how to simplify this and realize this is a pretty simple telescope. I mean, there's just not many moving parts. And that's what makes it beautiful, is that there's not many moving parts, which means almost everything can be fixed. It's like the old Model Ts, you know, they don't have a lot of power, but they were able to fix them practically with anything, you know, just even wire and chewing gum, just about. The new stuff is more complicated. So if you get something with a lot of electronics or whatever else, it's a little bit more complicated to fix. But these telescope is pretty much just a tube that looks at the sky, and you look at an eyepiece and make a focus adjustment. Everything else is just details. And so with a little bit of work, you could find these things. And what I find really fascinating, because I'm a business guy, I came from the business world, is that to have a telescope after 10 years that's operating as well as it is right now, I would say that's a pretty good return on investment for the library. In other words, how many books do you have that last that long? And I'm not saying the telescopes look terrible now. They actually look pretty darn good. They actually work pretty well still. And that's after 10 years. And so I think the library should be pretty excited about that. So my message tonight is it's not as complicated as it looks. And yeah, you probably could use an astronomy club around you to help you with some tuning of things. But for the most part, this stuff just works. You know, especially if you got a little bit of a creative staff, or you got a science teacher around you that can help you with some of the level 2 or level 3 time and maintenance things. All right, so that's I think what I have tonight, unless you guys have some other questions, and we're going to wrap up this next month. We will be talking about International Observe the Moon Night, and I will get this out, this recording out onto our website. So if you have friends that would like to see it on our website, or some of the other many videos that we have out there of all kinds of things, everything about how to start a program, whatever else. Most of these are pretty much 30 minutes with a variety of different speakers speaking from the library or from the patron point of view, or whatever else, astronomy point of view. So I think you'll find these are really hopefully informative for yourself. So have a great night, and thanks to everyone for joining. Okay, good night.